I'm a warehouse worker for a small business in my city. I'd been in and out of jobs for a while, so this wasn't really a career or anything. I just did what I had to do every night, and that was it. Specifically, I had to unload pallets of shipments that came in and put everything in their designated places in the warehouse. Super simple job, and most of the time I just put in earbuds and listened to music while I did it. With the warehouse not being too big, very rarely would there be another person working overnight with me. That would only be on the holidays, but this night was just a regular night. I came in, counted the stock, then put my headphones in and started unloading the boxes from the shipments. I started at 10, and it was probably somewhere between 12 and 1 a.m. when a knock echoed through the building. I took my headphones out and listened, but didn't hear it anymore. The building was old and would creak and groan throughout the nights, especially when it was windy outside. But what I thought I heard was clearly someone knocking. I walked down to the back of the building and looked around, then went to the front. I didn't see anything inside, so I opened the front door and looked outside. The parking lot was empty, and the night was still and quiet. I shut and locked the door, then went back to work, thinking I must have just misheard it. Being more cautious though, I left my headphones out for a bit. 20-ish minutes went by before I heard something again. This wasn't a knock though, it was more of a single thump coming from the front. I hurried down the hallway and up to the front portion of the warehouse. Nothing was there. No signs of anything wrong or anyone at the door. I knew what I heard this time though, which is why I got kind of nervous. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment and just looked around silently, listening and looking for something, anything, to be the cause of these noises. Standing there, I got a bad gut feeling, just that something wasn't good about this. I walked up to the front door and leaned on it to look out at the parking lot again, but as I put my weight on the door, it swung open with ease. I stumbled forward, not expecting it. It was almost as if the door wasn't locked or even latched at all. Yet I had checked and locked it not even a half hour ago. I looked at the door, then saw the latch lying broken on the ground in front of me. My stomach tightened, and I felt my adrenaline suddenly spike. Not even a second later, I heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing from the dim hallway behind me. I quickly went out the door and into the parking lot, still in a dazed and unsure state. Once I was a good distance from the door, I turned around. Barely visible through the glass door, the shape of a figure walked up to the other side. They moved around for a moment, definitely looking at me. Then they walked away. I called the cops as soon as I could and waited in the parking lot, but never saw any more movement in the building. When they arrived, they found that he'd left through the back door, and it seems like they couldn't figure out anything else to help solve the case. A few things showed up missing, but nothing substantial. And honestly, I think it was probably just from a wrong stock count. Regardless of if anything was stolen, to break the latch, he must have had some kind of tool or weapon, which only makes the whole thing more scary. They also moved the door back to look like it was closed, knowing it would keep me from figuring out what was going on. Maybe if I hadn't noticed the door was broken, I would have come face to face with whoever that man was, and I have no way of knowing how that would have turned out. Although unlikely, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was coming after me for some reason, so I've since left that job and moved on, hoping I don't run into him again. I live in a duplex in a small community. I'd been there for over a year and hadn't found anything to really complain about. The neighbors that were sharing a wall with me had moved out only a month after I moved in, and nobody had bought or rented it since, so it didn't really feel like a duplex at all, because the other side was just empty. Anyway, this was a pretty normal night. I'd just gotten off of work at 10 and picked up some fast food before going home. I turned on the TV and ate my dinner on the couch. While I was eating, though, a quiet thud came from behind me. I turned around and looked at the wall that connected my duplex to the other, and the thud happened again. I muted the TV and went up to the window, looking out at the driveway. There were no cars or moving trucks outside, and it didn't look like the lights were on in the other duplex either. I went back to the wall and leaned my ear against it. The sound was very muffled, but I could hear soft footsteps walking around and doors opening and closing. It was like they were inspecting the place or looking for something. Again, that duplex unit had been empty for over a year, and I'd never seen anyone enter or leave it, and it being almost 11 p.m. only made it more unusual. After a few minutes, I knew there wasn't much else to really do, so I went back to the couch and continued watching TV. I stayed up for a while, probably 1 a.m., before getting in bed. As I tossed around and tried to fall asleep, I suddenly heard that same noise. I sat up, looking at the wall, but when the thud sounded again, it was a lot louder. I tiredly got up and walked over to the bedroom door, but before I opened it, I heard another sound. Soft footsteps slowly walking across the floor downstairs. A chill instantly ran through my body. I stepped away from the door and quietly got my phone from the nightstand. I turned the volume down as low as possible and called the police, whispering my address to the operator. I tried to explain my situation, but as I did, a shadow appeared under the door. I immediately stopped talking and anxiously stared across at the door while the person on the other side slowly walked around. They were very cautious with each step they took, almost not making any noise, but their shadow showed that they weren't going very far. They were just walking back and forth in the hallway. By now, I was sure that they knew I was in this room, but I still remained quiet and hoped that somehow police would come quick enough to help me. A grueling few minutes went by, until a sudden loud footstep rang through the hallway, followed by another and another. For some reason, whoever was out there no longer cared to be quiet, moving through the hallway quickly and beginning to open doors to the other rooms. When he came back to my room, he twisted the handle and tried a few times to force it open, but moved on from it without too much of a fight. Then he went back downstairs and did the same before leaving the unit. Police came a while later, but I think the person that broke in had figured out that I'd likely contacted the police, and that's why they started rushing whatever it was they were trying to do. A few things had been stolen, but not enough to really justify breaking into a place, and from their behavior, they seemed to know that I was in the house. A few weeks later, though, I found a small camera hiding under one of the nightstands in the spare bedroom. I took it into the police, but there was no way to trace it or see what kind of information was on it. Whether they were just trying to spy on me or had other intentions that we don't know, there's really no way for us to get an answer. It's been months since this happened, and there's been no signs of them coming back. But it's possible that I wouldn't even know if they did. At least, not until it's too late. I signed up for Uber Eats back when it was really gaining traction in 2021. I'd just gotten laid off from my previous job, and it seemed nearly impossible to find any other job quickly, so this was a bit of a risk that I hoped would work out. A couple months in, I was enjoying it enough, and it was paying me enough for me to keep with it. This happened just around a year after I started. I'd fallen into the habit of waking up late and staying up late, so I hadn't started working until around dinner time. By 11 p.m., I still hadn't made enough to be good for the night, so I continued on, taking pretty much any order that popped up. It was at 1 a.m. when an order came through that was interesting. It was a grocery order from a 24-hour 7-Eleven gas station. I still accepted it, but it was just odd to me that someone would need groceries from a gas station in the middle of the night. I drove up and parked at the mostly empty gas station and went into the convenience store. The only person inside was a kind old man working at the register. I picked up the bag from him and also got myself a cup of coffee for the road, then headed back to my car. I got in and situated myself before backing out and getting on the road for the final stretch of the drive. Only a moment after getting onto the main street, though, I noticed a car's headlights right behind me. Mind you, this was very late, and almost no cars were out, so I was sure I would have seen them before they were so close. After some thinking, I thought they must have been at the gas station, maybe parked on the side of the building, and pulled out as soon as I did. I drove along this same road for a while, reaching the edge of town, when I suddenly felt something wrong with my car. It was way bumpier than usual, and a loud kind of scraping sound was coming from the right side. After a minute from noticing this, it became a lot worse. So bad that I had to pull off to the side before the car would break down in the road. I parked on the shoulder with woods on either side of me, but in the mirror, I saw the headlights of that same car slowing down and pulling in right behind me. Unsure what was going on, I decided to get out quickly and see what the problem was. I didn't know if the car behind me was going to try and help me out, or if they had something else in mind, but I knew I couldn't go anywhere until I figured this out. I ran around to the other side of my car and quickly noticed the problem. My right tire was completely flattened, which was crazy. I hadn't run over anything, and usually flat tires happen gradually, not so suddenly like this. I took a closer look, seeing a gash right on the side of the tire that didn't look natural at all. Then I heard a door open from the car behind me. A man stepped out and waved at me. "I'm okay, thank you," I called out, trying to get them to leave before even approaching, especially after realizing this was all really sketchy. But the man kept walking toward me. Once he got maybe 10 feet away, I could see him more clearly. He was older, with long gray and black hair and a bushy, untamed beard. He wore basic clothes, jeans and a hoodie, but they were covered in stains and grime. He came up next to my car and asked if he could help me out, showing a large smile. I said again that I was okay, but he only laughed, looking at my tire and back at me. A few seconds of awkward silence passed as the man held his smile before I lied and said I had a friend on his way to pick me up. Now, having rejected his help 3 times, the man's smile gradually fell into a straight face. He turned his body toward the car and very unnaturally looked around. This is when I got the immediate rush through my body to get away from this man, and I only had one option to do so. I bolted off the road and into the tree line, hearing the man follow me into the pitch-black woods. It only lasted for a few seconds before I lost him. After that, I didn't go very far at all, still able to see the headlights on the road, and I could make out the man's figure moving around by the cars. A few minutes later, he got in his car and left. By now, I'd had enough time to pretty much figure out that this was all a setup from the Uber Eats order, having been followed from the gas station where he likely slashed my tire. However, I didn't think it would be so easy to catch him. His full name and everything on the app turned out to be real. I guess he didn't think that we would have tied it all back to the Uber Eats order. That being said, the punishment wasn't very harsh because he didn't harm me. He only stole some things from my car. Though I'm sure that if I had stayed there on the road, I might not even be here to share this story. I was at home for 3 days for a mini stay-at-home vacation from work. I live in a very rural area, about an hour from the city. Honestly, I hadn't really taken these days off for any particular reason. I guess I was just feeling like I needed a break. It was on my first day off as I stayed at home and watched TV, among doing some other small things around the house. Around dinner time, though, a knock came from the front door. I sat up from the couch and looked at the clock, seeing it was 7 p.m. It was strange for anyone to be at my house in general, but given the time as well, it was even more so. I walked up to the door and cracked it open. A man was on the doorstep, smiling at me. He looked like any other guy, no special features or anything. "What do you need?" I asked, looking around behind him and noticing no car or truck in my driveway. The man maintained his smile as he went through a whole scenario he was in just a few minutes ago. He said he was on the road that connected to my driveway when someone slammed into his car and drove off, leaving him stranded and having to come to me for help. The way he described it, and just from looking at him, things didn't seem to add up. My driveway was far from the road, and the chances he got into an accident right by the entrance was almost zero on such an empty road. I told him I'd call the police for him if he'd like, but the man declined. He said he wanted to borrow my phone to call his wife. It took me a few seconds to respond, because being unsure about the situation made me nervous to say no to him. I said I would call the police and that was it, but the man's smile went away as he said don't worry about it and walked away from the porch. I closed the door, then looked out the window as the man walked down the driveway and disappeared in the dark. After a moment, I called the police just to be safe. About 20 minutes later though, I got a call back from them saying there were no signs of any crashes on the road. I stayed up late that night, looking out the windows and just being overall a little bit uneasy. But once it got to around 12, I was too tired to stay up. I went upstairs to my bedroom and got ready, then got in bed and fell fast asleep. I remember waking up frantically, but not understanding why. Like maybe I'd heard something in my sleep, but didn't wake up fast enough to comprehend it. Looking over, it was about 3 a.m. I got up from my bed and walked over to the door so I could listen for any sounds in the rest of the house. It was mostly quiet, but I could hear a slight rustling sound from somewhere outside. I carefully walked down the stairs to check on it, thinking it was probably just a bush brushing against the house. But as I got to the downstairs hallway, I realized the sound was moving. It was going along the edge of the house and toward the front. I felt my heart start racing as I tried to reassure myself everything was okay. But then the rustling stopped, and only a moment later, there was a knock at the door. I stood still at the end of the hallway and stared at the front door, terrified of whoever was out there. After a few seconds, I moved away and up to a small window on the side of the house that had a view of the porch. Through the blinds, I could see two men, both in dark clothing, and both holding something in their hands. It looked like tools or weapons of some kind. My eyes widened in fear as I backed away and quietly walked back up to my room. More knocking echoed through the house as I called the police and locked myself in. As I stayed on the phone, the knocks turned into banging thuds. I immediately knew it was what I feared. They were trying to break the door down. Hit after hit, non-stop for over 5 minutes, they banged on the door, shaking the whole house. Then the operator on the phone finally said an officer was pulling up to my house, and at that same time, all the banging stopped. When the cop pulled up though, he said he didn't see any men at my door. They must have run off just before he could see them. The door, however, was barely hanging on. The wood was bent and splintered, with only the bolt lock still in place. I was lucky that the police were able to show up quick enough, but I guess I was also smart to have not helped that one man. I'm assuming if I had, I would have only accelerated their plans to do whatever it was they were trying to do. Even today though, I still worry about them coming back. I'm a receptionist at a popular hotel chain in the US. For the better part of a year, I'd been working overnights. This night, I was doing my usual shift of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was pouring outside, so I wasn't expecting any walk-ins, and on the schedule, it didn't show any bookings starting tonight. On nights like these, my job is to just stay awake and take phone calls, or help current customers with any room services or checkouts. We had a coffee machine in the hotel lobby, so I had a cup of coffee next to me as I tried to stay awake. Even having been on overnights for a while now, I still had trouble with getting tired on my shifts. The rain outside made me even more tired as well. But at 1 a.m., a phone call came in. I answered, and before I could even speak, a man quickly asked if we were still accepting walk-ins. Their voice was very muffled though, and there was a background sound that was really loud. "Yeah, we have rooms available for walk-ins tonight," I said. They responded, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. As I asked if they could repeat themselves, I looked up from the desk and saw a small light glowing outside. It was from a phone as someone was holding it up to their ear, standing almost right up against the front window in the pouring rain. Knowing it had to be the man I was talking to, I was about to wave to them, but something about this made me feel uneasy, so I decided to pretend like I didn't see him. A moment later though, he ended the phone call. I saw the lights turn off outside and the outline of the man moving toward the entrance. The doors opened and the man walked through the hotel lobby, dragging water across the floor. He came up to the counter and bluntly asked for a room. He was fully soaked and had water dripping from his hair, yet his face showed nothing but exhaustion. I don't know if I'd ever seen someone look so sleep-deprived. I said okay and found him a room, then asked how he'd like to pay for it. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a debit card, then handed it to me. I swiped it, but it declined. I looked up at him, only to see he was staring at me. It didn't go through. Do you have another card to try?" The man didn't respond, holding his stare and not moving aside from a few blinks. As the seconds kept on without any reaction, I grew more and more uneasy. I looked down and put the card on the desk, sliding it back to him, but he didn't even look at it. He turned and started walking away from the desk and toward the hallway with the rooms. By now, I knew something wasn't right, so I quickly pressed the button that calls for police, then went out to the hallway the man was in, finding him standing at the door to one of the rooms. He started pounding on it, yelling in a harsh voice for them to open the door. I tried telling him to stop, but I didn't want to get too close, not knowing if he was in some kind of dangerous state. But then he pulled a small knife from his pocket and started trying to pry the door open. I yelled at him to stop and that the police were on their way. The man stopped for a second and shot an awful glance at me, then faced me and screamed at me to open the door for him as he started walking down the hallway. I was terrified and just ran right out of the hotel and into the parking lot. Through the window, I could see him go back to the same door and continue pounding on it. Police were quick to show up, making it inside before the man could get into the room. Somehow they got him to drop the knife and locked him up in their car. The person that was in the room came out. It was a kind young lady, visibly shaking and horrified. Turned out the man was an ex of hers that she hadn't seen or talked to in over 10 years. How he got the information on where she was staying and even what room she was in, nobody seems to know. They aren't even sure how long he'd been stalking her for, which is really disturbing. But what he would have done had he gotten in is likely even more disturbing. I'm a local truck driver for a common grocery store in our city. This means I stay in the same 50-ish mile radius and drive between the warehouse and several stores every day to deliver pallets of groceries. I don't have to make any drives more than 2 hours long, so every night I get to go home at a reasonable time and sleep in my own bed, rather than at a truck stop like most cross-country or regional truckers have to. This day was pretty average, going between a few stores and delivering the pallets, and I got to my last delivery location around 9. It took a half hour for them to empty the trailer, but then I was good to head back to the warehouse and turn in for the night. This was always the farthest drive though, being that the warehouse was on the edge of the city, away from everything. An hour into the drive, and about when I reached 15 minutes away, I pulled into a gas station to fill up, as I'd been riding on empty for probably too long. I went into the diesel section and started the gas pump. While I leaned against the truck and waited, I saw a group standing outside of a parked pickup truck on the other side of the gas station. They were the only ones there, but they kept eyeing me, looking over at both me and my truck. It was odd, but I thought they were just waiting for me to leave, probably so they could do something stupid without any bystanders. Once my truck was full, I put the pump back and got in, driving out of the gas station. As I did, the group got into their pickup and left as well, pulling up right behind me. Now it was definitely more than just odd. I still didn't know exactly what they were planning to do, but they weren't even trying to hide it. Over the next mile, as we got further out toward the edge of the city, they kept swerving around behind me, going in and out of the lane, and unable to keep a consistent speed. I got my phone from the mount and called the police to report the group for reckless and possibly drunk driving. Being in a huge semi, I didn't feel unsafe, but I was more worried for anyone else that may be on the road. After a couple more minutes though, they swerved into the lane next to me and sped up until they were right across from my window. I looked down at them, seeing a few guys looking at me and saying something to the others. Then they sped up again and slammed on the brakes right in front of me. I had no choice than to brake as well, stopping just before ramming into them. As soon as I did, all the doors swung open and 4 of them came running to either side of my truck, trying to open the doors and get in. I immediately went in reverse, trying to put some distance between us before I put it back in drive. My only choices were to take a chance at driving off the road, which might make my trailer topple over, or I could ram through their pickup. Obviously, I went straight through their truck. All 4 of them ran off the road just before I hit it, and after 30 seconds, I was long gone. By the time I got to the warehouse, police had shown up to the scene, finding their pickup on the side of the road and all 4 of them standing by it. As the officer put it, they were all intoxicated, but not willing to cooperate in explaining what they were doing. Whatever they were trying to do, it was pretty scary having 4 drunk and aggressive guys trying to break into my truck. Although it all happened so fast, and maybe doesn't seem that bad, I think if I'd not acted so quickly, it easily could have escalated to something truly awful. But there's really no way to know what could have happened. I work overnights as a gas station clerk in our small town. Our station is located off the highway that leads out of town, and so usually most of the cars and trucks that come by are on long drives across the state. This makes most night shifts that I work to be unpredictable. Sometimes there would be a lot of cars and trucks coming through, but other times it would be mostly empty. This night was definitely on the slower side, but still had some cars stopping by every once in a while. Thankfully, to keep me busy, my boss had left me a bunch of tasks to get done during my shift. I had to reset one of the shelves, which meant taking everything off and repositioning the racks, then placing everything back. It's not hard or complicated, but just time-consuming. An hour into the night, I heard some thunder in the distance, and checking the forecast, it said it was going to start storming soon. So I paused what I was doing and quickly went outside to take care of the trash bins so I wouldn't have to do it later while it was raining. While I was out there, I saw a car's headlights in the dark about a quarter-mile down the road. They were parked, but there was nothing out there other than large empty fields. It could have been nothing, or a flat tire possibly, but I went on with my work and got back inside. Not too long after, it started pouring outside. I continued on working on the shelves, but as the storm got worse, I had to actually lock the entrance doors because the wind kept swinging them open. Nobody had come into the store all night anyway, and now with the storm, there were barely any cars out either. While I locked up though, I saw that the headlights were still out by the field and hadn't moved. This kept my mind occupied for the next little while as I worked. But then, through the rain, I heard the door shake louder than usual. I turned around, seeing a guy with his face right up to the door and staring right at me. He looked probably early 40s, wearing a hood over his head and having a very tired look. I unlocked the door and opened it for him, making a comment about the bad weather, but he ignored me. The guy just stood there and looked at me as water dripped from his face. Then he walked past me and started walking through the aisles like a normal shopper. Really confused by the way he was acting, I just went around the counter and waited for him to be done shopping. He walked around for a few minutes, glancing over at me a couple times before walking out the door. I don't think he stole anything either. He just walked around and then left. Considering the weather, that was really unusual and had me almost creeped out in a way, wondering why he even bothered coming inside. I looked out the window and saw the man walking past the gas pumps and out to the road. Then he stopped on the corner and waited. A moment later, the headlights down the road started moving, coming toward the gas station and stopping right next to the guy. While I watched, the front doors started swinging open again, reminding me to go over and lock them. I then watched from the door as the guy started walking back toward the gas station and the car followed, driving into the parking lot. They parked by the front and another man got out of the car, and then both of them came walking up to the door. The first man pushed on it, as if expecting it to have still been unlocked, but instantly got angry when it didn't open. I was only a couple feet from the door, but he still banged aggressively on it while looking right at me. This was far beyond what any normal customer would do, so at this point, I knew there was more to this. I ran to the desk and triggered the alarm to notify the police station, then just watched as they both tried kicking the door down for a minute before getting in the car and speeding away. Afterward, in those minutes before police showed up, it was just so unreal how everything felt, with only the sound of the storm outside. There was no doubt what was about to have happened, but it doesn't make it any less terrifying. If it wasn't storming that night, and the wind wasn't blowing the doors open, I probably never would have even locked them, meaning they could have just walked in, and there would have been nothing I could do. Maybe it would have been just a regular robbery, but there's no denying that it probably would have been easiest for them to just take me down and then rob the place. Unfortunately, they were never caught, so I still find myself getting nervous on every overnight shift. My parents own a small shop in our town. It's nothing special, just selling regular groceries and food from local businesses. They'd been running it for over 20 years, and my dad took it very seriously, keeping the store open until 12 every night, and sometimes even staying later. When I turned 16, I started helping out a few hours a week, and when I turned 18, I started working full-time while doing online college courses. This night was my dad's day off, and my mom was having some health issues at the time, so it was just me closing the store. It usually stays not so busy for the last few hours of the night, and there was never too much to stock either. Around 9, almost no customers were coming in. I think only 1 or 2 people came in, so I grabbed a sandwich from the fridge and took a quick lunch break. Of course, right when I did, someone walked in. I made my way back to the front desk and put the sandwich aside, waiting for the customer to finish shopping first. I pulled my phone out, and after a couple minutes, I looked up to see how the customer was doing, but didn't see him. I scanned the room again and still didn't see him anywhere. Thinking they were maybe in some off angle I couldn't see, I waited a few more minutes, but they still never came into sight. I didn't even hear them either. Feeling off, I walked around the counter and started looking through the aisles, and it didn't take long to find them. In the second aisle, a man was crouched down at the end, staring at the floor and not moving or making a sound. "Sir?" The man immediately looked up at me, then stood up and continued to stare at me. All I could focus on were his eyes. They were wide and full, kind of in an unsettling way. But after a couple seconds, he quickly walked away and out of the store, never having spoken a word. Once I saw him leave, my first reaction was to check where he was crouching to see if there was any reason to be there, but there wasn't. I mean, that whole time, he was just crouching in the aisle. It kind of freaked me out because of how odd it was. I went up to the front door and checked that he'd fully left the area. Obviously it was dark out, but I didn't see him anywhere. I then went back to the counter and stayed a little more alert. 3 hours passed, and not a single customer came in. It was now time to close up, and after so much time passing, I wasn't thinking about that man anymore. I was just ready to go home. I walked up to the front and locked up the door, then grabbed my bag and started walking toward the back door to leave, when an extremely loud bang screeched through the store. I stopped in place, knowing it had to come from somewhere in the back, and it was so loud that I had no idea what it could have been. Worried, I slowly walked to the corner and looked down the back hallway. At the far end, dust was scattering through the air as the metal back door was loosely open, and standing right in the hallway was that same man from earlier. He was staring at me with the same wide-open eyes. I didn't know what to say or do. It was like I was just frozen in that moment. Despite his clear determination to break in, he didn't look angry. He had no emotion at all. I took a few slow steps back, then ran for the front, leaving the store and running to the other side of the street, calling 911. I called my dad too, and he rushed over to make sure I was okay. The man at the store was gone when police got there, but he'd left behind a sledgehammer sitting on the pavement behind the store. At first sight, nothing looked to be missing or stolen, so his intentions are anyone's best guess. It's clear he was unstable though, which means he could have been planning anything. Thankfully for me, I didn't have to find out what that was. In 2019, I had taken a trip to northern Wisconsin and had been staying in an Airbnb. It was a cabin located in the woods right by the Canada-US border and was part of a park that had a bunch of similar cabins that I think were owned by the same person. I wasn't far out from town or anything though. It was only 10 minutes from the nearest store, but the immediate area around the cabin was very secluded. Each place had their own trail leading just to their cabin. The first couple days of being there, I mostly stayed by myself, either inside or walking on the trails. After that though, I got kind of bored and thought I'd hang out at the park center with some of the others that were staying in the cabins. The park center was basically just this area with some charcoal grills, fire pits, and benches. And every time I'd passed it, there were groups of people standing around and having a good time. So I decided to go check it out. I showed up around 5 and right away met a couple really cool guys. We shared some beers and sat by the fire pit, just sharing some casual campfire talk. It was just us for a while, but around sundown, another guy showed up. Of course, we offered him some drinks and let him join us by the fire, but I immediately felt something was off about this guy. He wasn't talking that much and didn't look like he was enjoying himself. I mean, this park was for people vacationing at the cabins, so it was just a little strange that he looked so tired and unhappy. It kind of killed the mood for the next couple hours, but I don't think any of us wanted to tell him to leave. Eventually, though, one of the guys left, and then the other, leaving just me and him. I stood up and put out the fire, then said I was going to head back for the night, but that it was nice meeting him. The guy stayed sitting, though, and just looked at me with a tired stare. I turned around and walked away, not saying anything else. While I started walking down the trail, I looked back a few times, catching the man still looking at me. He'd look away as soon as I saw him, acting like he wasn't watching me. Luckily, the trail to my cabin was well lit by some outdoor lamps, and from what I could see, I don't think he followed me. I made it back inside and took a quick shower, then sat in the living room for 15 minutes before going to bed. After the few beers from earlier, I passed out right away. I can't recall what time it was that I woke up, because it was all kind of a blur at first, but I remember being confused and rolling over to look at the clock when I saw a man standing in the open doorway to the bedroom. I could only see his figure, as there was only the moonlight coming through the window. I was absolutely horrified and frozen, staring back at this man. But then he spoke, and I recognized his voice as the guy from the fire pit. "I need to stay here," he said, in a broken and harsh voice. I didn't know what he meant, and I tried to ask, but only stuttered out a few syllables before he repeated himself. "I need to stay here." He spoke even more harsh this time, so I quickly replied, saying okay, but still had no clue what was going on or what he even meant. At this point, I thought he was psycho or something, which also meant he was unpredictable. I slowly got up from my bed, careful not to make any sudden moves. Now with my eyes adjusting and being face to face, I could see him more clearly. His tired look from earlier was accentuated, and sweat was dripping from his face. We looked each other in the eyes for a few moments, then he stepped back into the hallway. He stood with his back against the wall, as if giving me space to leave, but I noticed his left hand was stiffly held to his side, like he was keeping something out of my sight. After a few more moments, I quickly walked past him, and as I got around the corner, I saw him still standing in the hallway, just watching me leave. Once I was outside, I ran down the trail, and by chance, a group was at the park center having drinks by a fire pit. I got them to call 911 for me, and a few minutes later, they came and searched the cabin, finding the man standing in the hallway still, and holding a knife in his left hand. When they got him down to the station, they questioned him, but his answers didn't make sense, and the man seemed really unstable, so it was all counted under insanity. I don't even know what else to really say about what happened, but I'm just thankful that in that moment, something told the man to let me go before anything else happened. I had some spare time this night, and having chugged a few coffees earlier in the day, I figured I'd use this energy to go out and make some money. I was delivering for DoorDash, cruising on the highway to my next delivery. It was super late, the roads were empty, and the night was very peaceful. Basically every delivery driver's dream. On my way there though, my phone started buzzing. It was the customer calling me, but before I had a chance to answer it, they hung up. Since it only rang for a couple seconds, I thought it must have been an accident, but in case not, I redialed their number. It rang for a while, but they didn't answer. I shook my head and blew it off, not thinking about it for the rest of the drive. I got off the highway and drove into the neighborhood. It was a very regular street with average houses. When I got up to the house my delivery was for, I parked right in the driveway and started walking up to their porch. As I was setting down the bag, I saw that the front door was cracked open. I didn't know if it was meant for me or not, so I just lightly knocked on the door and called out that I was dropping off their food. As soon as I did, I heard a somewhat disturbing sound come from down the hallway. It was a muffled thump that almost mimicked my knocking, like someone was banging on a door. A bit shaken, I opened the front door wider and called out again. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just repeated myself that I was delivering their food. A few quiet moments went by, then I heard a door open from the back of the house, and a guy came around the corner. He looked distressed and bothered, but I couldn't tell if it was because of me or something else. The guy walked down the hall and right up to the doorway I was in, not saying a word as he started to reach for the bag. But that's when I heard those thumps again from down the hallway. I looked past him in confusion as he turned and looked as well, then quickly turned back and looked at me, recognizing that I heard it too.
"Is everything okay?"
I asked carefully. The sound echoed through the walls again as the man just kind of stared at me as if he were trying to think of what to do.
"Why don't you bring the food inside for me?"
he said, almost in a demanding tone. Nervously, I picked up the bag, but quickly realized how terrible of an idea this was. I felt threatened, like I had to follow him, but I also had a feeling that if I did, I wouldn't be making it out of there. In my hesitation, the guy's face showed he was even more bothered, angry even. He then reached out and grabbed the food right from my hands, then slammed the door in my face. Stunned, I stood there and listened as his footsteps went down the hallway and the thumping stopped. I couldn't do anything else at this point, so I hurried off the porch and got in my car. I ended my DoorDash after that one and ended up reporting the really disturbing scenario to the police. I think what ended up making me report it was that the man tried to get me to go inside his house. If not for that, I may have not felt there was enough evidence to get me to do anything. Unfortunately though, police informed me hours later that the man declined that anyone else was there and declined their request to search his home. At that point, there was nothing left to do other than speculate. I believe there was something truly horrible going on, and he was possibly ready to do the same to me, but I don't think we'll ever know for sure. I used to deliver Chinese food for a local restaurant. I was just a teenager in high school at the time, and whatever job I got wasn't going to be for more than a year or two. I'd say this job was fairly typical to most first jobs, or retail and food service jobs, because it had some slow and boring days, and some busy and stressful days. As the delivery driver though, I was always thankful to not have to be working in the store and dealing with mobs of customers. On this night, I started at 6 p.m. It was a Friday, so I was working a late 6 to 12 shift. As soon as I clocked in, I was delivering orders non-stop for the next 2 hours with no time to breathe in between them. At 8, orders were slowing a bit, but I still had a few more to deliver before I could take my lunch, so I grabbed the 3 orders and set out to get them done before 9. The first one was close, but the next 2 were further out. This isn't uncommon, as our town isn't all packed together. I got to the second house and dropped it off, then headed out to the final stop. It was 10 minutes from where I was, and the tag said it wasn't paid for yet. All I was thinking about during this drive was the break I'd get afterward. Going back and forth for 3 hours straight tired me out more than usual this night. I pulled into the neighborhood and followed the GPS until I got to a back portion where the whole atmosphere quickly changed. I turned down a thin road of cracked pavement and potholes with barely visible small houses on the side, covered by the thick bushes and unkempt lawns. When the GPS told me I'd arrived, I stopped the car, but didn't see a house. I turned my brights on, and ever so faintly, I could see the outline of a small house pretty far from the road I was on. I then looked at the grass leading up to it and realized there was actually a driveway. It was just engulfed in vines and tall grass. I would never have seen it if I hadn't seen the house first. Knowing I would be unable to even drive on it, I put the car in park and got out with the bag, then began to walk through the overgrown driveway. I couldn't believe how awful it was to walk through, and I couldn't imagine anyone letting their driveway get to this point. Getting closer though, I could see more of the house. It was very small, kind of like a trailer home, and looked to be in a matching condition to the driveway. Vines growing over the windows, and bushes covering every inch of the nearly decaying house. As I made my way up to the front door, I knew something was wrong. I knew it in my gut and in my head, but I was just some kid with a first job that was scared to lose it, so I felt like I had to do my job, which was to deliver the order to this address. I pushed all my bad feelings aside and knocked on the door. Right away, I heard footsteps coming up to the door. It opened, revealing a young lady behind it. At first, in the dim lighting, she looked very normal, and I felt a huge relief. But it only took a few more seconds to realize that her normal look was eerily out of place. With the house in this condition, there was no way she could be so well dressed and taken care of. As these thoughts scrambled through my head, she opened the screen door and said in a creepily calm tone,
"Come in."
Everything hit me in that moment as I stumbled back a few steps and decided that I needed to leave right away. I turned around, and only a second after beginning to leave, I heard a thud from the side of the house. I looked over, seeing 2 men running out from behind the house and sprinting through the bushes toward me. I dropped everything and started running. I did everything I could to get through the thick grass and vines, but just as I reached the end of the driveway, I stumbled to the ground, tripping over something. I hurried up, hearing their footsteps closing the distance on me. I couldn't even get myself to look back as I ran straight into my car. Turning it on, the men immediately stopped and ran back to where they came from. With my whole body still shaking from the adrenaline, I turned the car around and drove away. Of course, I let my boss know what happened, and he urged me to call the police and report it. I was really relieved to know he didn't care about the order, and only for my safety, which, looking back on it, it would have been horrible if it were any other way. Police interviewed me and my boss and did a whole investigation, ultimately unable to find any of the people. The property I was on, though, was actually state-owned, and the trespassing sign at the beginning of the road had been dug up and thrown into the tall grass. Their intentions are unknown, but it seems like the most obvious possibility is likely the answer. I just hope nobody else has to go through what I did, or if they do, I hope they can be as lucky as I was to get away. A year ago, in midwinter, I was staying at an Airbnb on the east coast of the US. I had a family member that was sick, and I wanted to be nearby for a few weeks in case of any emergencies. While staying there, I figured I might as well make a vacation of it, since I'd really be doing nothing else. So the Airbnb I got was a modern cabin with a small lake behind it. Most of the area around was a forest as well, so it was really nice and a very different landscape from where I lived. Anyway, about a week after I'd gotten there, I rented out some camping equipment and thought it'd be nice to go out by the lake and maybe spend a night on the beach. The Airbnb was only a short walk away, if there was any trouble, so it wasn't really much of an adventure. I just wanted to lay out by the stars and clear my head, I guess. I made a few walks out to bring all the equipment, then set up the tent. It was actually really easy because it was made for beginners, so I had plenty of time to get everything else set up, as well as a rock circle for the campfire. Once that was all done, I kicked back and relaxed, sipping on a beer as I watched the sunset. The calm sound of the campfire, along with the forest, was something I'd missed, having lived in a big city for so many years. But maybe 20 or so minutes after the sun had set, I was caught off guard by a guy walking up to my campsite. I stood up as a natural reaction, but the man seemed to see my worriness as he stopped walking and put his hands up, apologizing for the scare. He was about the same age as me, mid-30s, but was very tall and skinny. I looked past him at the forest he came from. There was no path that I could see. It was just a bunch of trees that backed up to the lake.
Where did you come from?
The man made a short grin as he said he was just staying in a place on the other side of the lake and saw my campfire, so he thought he'd come out and have a beer with me. I gave a nervous smile, as that wasn't exactly a normal thing to do, way out in the middle of a forest, and on second thought, I was pretty sure there were no houses on the other side of the lake.
I'm actually not looking for company right now. Sorry.
I said politely, hoping this could be a quick, harmless interaction. The guy seemed almost puzzled by my response, as his grin went down to a straight face. He glanced at the Airbnb that was behind me and stayed quiet. Then after a few moments of silence, he said okay and walked back the way he came. I watched, trying to keep track of him to see where exactly he was walking to, but he faded out into the darkness of the woods without any flashlight. Feeling pretty unnerved, I decided to grab most of my stuff and haul it back to the Airbnb, not wanting to risk being outside with that guy around. Trying to carry everything at once, though, was a bad move on my part, exhausting me after only getting halfway to the house, and just as soon as I stopped for a breather, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the woods. I turned, seeing the man storming straight out of the tree line and right toward me with a look of insanity in his eyes. I dropped everything and tried to run, but immediately got knocked to the ground. From the speed he tackled me at, we both tumbled on the grass, and I somehow managed to get on my feet before he could get a hold of me again. The guy followed close behind though, even close enough to grab my shirt a few times in an effort to stop me. When I got to the house, I knew I'd have no time to unlock the door, so I had to go straight for my car. I pulled the keys out of my pocket as I ran up to it, getting inside and locking it just before he got to the door. I turned it on and put it in reverse as the man slammed his fists into the window, shattering it with just a couple punches. He reached in and grabbed my arm as I backed up, swinging the front of the car in his direction. It must have caught him by surprise because he didn't move fast enough to get out of the way. All I saw was his body slam onto the ground and not get up as I drove away. I called for help immediately while I drove, wanting the police to get there quickly to get some answers out of him. But when they got there, the man was gone. All that was left were some shoe prints leading back into the woods.
When I was 14, my dad and I lived in a small studio apartment on Hollywood Beach in Florida. We didn't have hardly any money, but we treated ourselves to take out every other Thursday from the same Chinese place a few blocks away. They were family run, so the same guy came to deliver the food pretty much every time. We found out later he was the adult son of the woman who owned the restaurant. It was my job every other Thursday to answer the door and pay for the food, while my dad found something on TV for us to watch while we ate. He was short, with gray hair and glasses. I was friendly, but not talkative. At 14, I was still in my shy stage. We never had a conversation other than the typical hello and have a nice day. During that time, I was left alone a lot. Both my dad and I felt like 14 was old enough to spend a few hours home alone in the afternoons, after school. I was also very close with a woman who lived next door and her goddaughter, so I would spend a lot of time over there when my dad wasn't home. I walked home from school as well, and it was one school day afternoon, an hour or so after I had gotten home, that the phone rang. This was around 2004, so having a house phone was still really common. Ours was set up at the side of the table in the main room of the studio apartment. I answered it, and for a second I thought there was going to be no one on the other end, because there was a long pause. Then a sort of stammering that I couldn't understand. Then, "This is Alan," which was barely understandable because of the heavy Asian accent. I say Asian because I'm not sure if it's okay to assume they were Chinese, just because they ran a Chinese restaurant. By now, you obviously know that Alan is the Chinese delivery guy, but at this point, 14-year-old me is confused. Who the hell is Alan? I say something along the lines of, what? And he clarifies, "Your delivery guy. Chinese delivery." Now I am even more confused. What does Alan the delivery guy want? He goes on, "Did you, order food?" "No, we did not," and I tell him so. He is quiet for another second or so, then, "Are you home alone?" My heart dropped into my stomach. Now I'm pretty sure I know what Alan the delivery guy wants, and yes, I was home alone, but I wasn't about to let him know that. My first instinct was to tell him that my dad was home, but this wouldn't work because his work van wasn't outside, and I realized that Alan had been to our house enough over the last few years to know my dad's van, and if he drove by, he would know he wasn't home. "My uncle is here," I say, and immediately I think it's a horrible attempt at a lie, and Alan is going to know that. "Why?" I challenge him. He's quiet again for a moment, then a statement, not a question. "You are home alone." I am stunned and I have no idea what to say now as I'm trying to think of something. "Never mind," he says and hangs up. I'm so weirded out and scared at this point that even though part of me thinks I actually scared him out of whatever he had planned, another part of me says go lock all of the doors. So I do, front and back. By the time I get to the front room from locking the back door, I look out the front window and I see a car parked in the driveway. It's Alan, just sitting in his car. The windows are rolled up and lightly tinted, but I can see him behind the steering wheel just staring at my door. 30 seconds later, the house phone starts ringing again. I don't answer it. Alan stays parked in the driveway for about 5 more minutes. I stood looking out the window the whole time, thinking to myself that the second he got out of the car, I was going to grab a knife from the kitchen. Such a dramatic young woman I was. The house phone starts to ring one last time. I don't answer it. As soon as it stops ringing the second time, I pick it up and dial 911. I was terrified. Not only because of Alan, but I was afraid my dad was going to be angry with me for calling the police. It is a completely different story, but he and the law have not always been on the same side, and I was raised with a sort of subliminal aversion to the police, and the idea that anything I couldn't handle myself, my dad could handle for me. Alan drove away while I was on the phone with the 911 operator. I was in the middle of telling her he was calling the house and parked in the driveway, when he just put the car in reverse and sped down the street. The police took a statement from me when they got to my house, then sent me next door to hang out with a neighbor and her goddaughter. We sat on the front porch and I told her the story of what happened, while the officers went down to the restaurant to talk to Alan and contact my dad. In the end, Alan was able to get off with a warning by telling the officers that there was a confusion and he thought that we had ordered food, which his mother confirmed. When asked why he wanted to know if I was home alone, he said he was trying to get an adult on the phone. The police told them that they will have to make someone else make deliveries to customers in my area from now on, and to make sure that Alan keeps his distance. In all honesty, I think it was my dad's phone call to the restaurant later that really made Alan realize he had screwed up, and not the warning from the cops. He was fuming when I told him the story, as I imagine most fathers would be. He called the restaurant and spoke to the woman who owned the place first, then somehow convinced her to put Alan on the phone. What followed was one of the greatest conversations I have ever heard, even if it was only my dad's side I was hearing. Nothing makes you feel more loved than your dad in macho protection mode. My dad threw insults that I have never even heard of before, and I was in middle school, a kingdom of insult connoisseurs. I knew it was a very serious situation, and I knew that my dad was really angry, but I was in the background stifling laughter into a pillow. At one point, my dad asked Alan what the hell he was thinking for driving over here, to which Alan responded something about being lonely, and my dad said, "If I ever catch you on the street again, Alan, if I even hear that you were near this street, I will make sure that you are lonely for the rest of your life." We stopped eating from that restaurant after that. So I work at a pizza place, usually inside the restaurant, as my insurance does not cover claims when driving for business, but occasionally I will cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers because the money is good. Our delivery area includes a few new development, upper middle class cookie cutter neighborhoods, bad tips, an older 1940s era village, average tips, 2 apartment complexes, great tips, some trailer parks, great tips or no tips at all, and a bunch of rural areas, usually good tips. Not rural to the point of seeing hundreds of stars at night, but enough that you couldn't hear your neighbors yell. So about a week ago I was covering a delivery shift. I came back to the shop feeling pretty good. I'm averaging $5 a delivery so far, and they have all been pretty close. And I checked to see if I have any more deliveries to do. And I do. I have one to an address I have never seen before. We mostly have regulars get deliveries, so an address that doesn't seem the least bit familiar is odd. It's out on one of the more rural roads. I asked the kid who took the order what was up because there were special instructions on the ticket. He says, "They said go around back because the front door is not operational." I'm like, okay, well that's not that uncommon. People often want you to go around to the back. Either they painted the door recently, or the house shifted and it's a bitch to open, or they are just hanging out in the back. So as I'm driving out to the house, I get an odd feeling. I don't really like the idea of going to the back of some house out in the sticks. It would all be too easy for some thugs to order a pizza to an abandoned house. There are quite a few in the more rural areas. Then jump the delivery guy. I figure I'll scope the place out when I get there, and if it seems sketchy, just call them and make some bullshit up about how it's against company policy to go around the back of houses to prevent robberies. As I am driving to the house, I realize it's towards the end of this road that gets less populated the further down you go. Great. I'm pretty near the address and driving slow. I see this house that is abandoned looking and set back from the roads with no address and in a bunch of trees. I think, this house better not be it. So I drive past and check the next house's address, and lo and behold, that abandoned looking one was the right house. Shit. At this point, I am not super worried though, because out in the boonies, the standards of upkeep on your house are pretty low, so a house in disrepair isn't necessarily unusual. So I double back to this house and I pull into the driveway. At this point, I'm getting bad vibes. It just doesn't feel right. So I park my car at the very end of the driveway with the rear of the car on the shoulder so anyone passing by can clearly see it. At this point, I call back to the shop and tell them I'm at this sketchy house, and if I don't call back in 4 or 5 minutes to call me, and if I don't answer, call the cops. While I'm on the phone, I take a chance to take a good look at the house. It looks extremely abandoned and not just in disrepair. The driveway is crumbling, bits of gravel, and there are weeds growing out of it. There is no mailbox, no trash cans, no car, no lawnmowers, no landscaping, no kids' toys. Absolutely nothing in the yard. The yard hasn't been mowed in what looks like years. The house is total crap, and the roof is all but falling apart. The siding is falling apart, and even the back deck, which comes around the side, is falling apart. The only part of this house that looks even a little bit decent is the allegedly non-functioning front door. The windows are all shut. It's like 95 degrees and humid, and this place does not have an AC. They all have the blinds or curtains shut. The few that aren't are actually boarded up. I don't even see any wires running to this house. It's not dark yet, but it's dusk, and there isn't a sign of any lights on in the house. At this point, I'm starting to get a little bit nervous. I'm a 5'10" male, 180 pounds, but not in any great shape. But I did take karate for 10 years, so I'm not completely helpless. But I do try to avoid any sort of confrontation I can, as I'm mostly a pacifist. I'm not too concerned about getting robbed. No skin off my teeth, it's not my money. I mean, I would rather not get robbed, but I'm mostly worried about getting jumped or killed. It's a fairly safe area, but recently there have been some rather unsavory people moving in from the city. A big spike in home invasions and robberies, but more worrying, a few stabbings and assaults. So it's either time to nut up or shut up. I'm not just going to go charging in there like a fool, so I get out my phone and call the number they gave when ordering. While I'm doing that, I'm also getting the pizza out and make sure to leave my door open. A running car half in the road at an abandoned house with the door open looks suspicious, right? I figure if shit goes down, it might look out of place enough to make someone stop. Not that there is really any traffic this far down the road. I'm starting to walk up to the house while the phone's ringing. It rings twice, and then an automated message comes on. It says something along the lines of this phone number is associated with an internet texting app. One of the ones that you download, and it lets you send free text from a different phone number over a data connection. I think it's called Haywire. We have had issues with people using numbers from those services for pranks in the past. This is a huge red flag. My heart is now pounding in my throat and my whole body is telling me to bail. I don't want to get a reputation for being a flaky bitch as a driver and lose any future delivery shifts, and that is why I have not bailed yet. So I'm just standing there holding the pizza, looking at this house, but not wanting to venture around to the back of it. I'm hoping that the resident will look out of the window and come out by the road to get their food. So I am looking at the front windows, checking for some sign of life. I could see a blind go up the one window next to the front door, and a really creepy looking guy with a hat pulled low and big sunglasses on is looking out. Remember, he is in a completely dark house surrounded by trees. At dusk, there is no reason for him to be wearing sunglasses. I also see what appears to be a big guy standing behind him in the room. This could have been anything though. When he sees me looking at him, he mouths something and he darts away, presumably towards the allegedly broken front door. At this point, I nope the hell out of there. I had stayed pretty close to my car, so it was only a few steps away. I jumped into the driver's seat and threw the pizza into my passenger seat. Something I would never do, since I'm really anal about keeping my car clean. I slam it into reverse before I get the clutch all the way in, so I grind my gears a little. Again, something I never do. Without looking, I simultaneously slam and lock my door and floor it backwards onto the main road. I didn't even check for cross traffic. Really stupid on my part. I start to drive away and look back at the house. The screen door on the outside of the front door is now open, but the front door is still shut. The guy isn't out in the yard yelling, "Wait, come back," or anything. He's just gone. So I pull over a little ways up the road to call back to shop and tell them I'm all good and I'll elaborate when I get back. The people never called back to inquire about their food. People usually like to call if their pizza is 15 minutes late, and these people never got it, so it's pretty strange that they didn't call. pretty much confirms to me that they were up to no good. After telling my coworkers about it, we concluded it was definitely a robbery at the very least. So we put the address and phone number on our no deliveries list and ate their pizza. I doubt I would have actually gotten murdered or anything. Robbed with maybe a gun or a knife pulled on me, or a little roughing up, yes, but it was still very unnerving that I easily could have gotten into some serious trouble by just doing my job. Especially if the idiots picked a slightly less abandoned house to set up at. A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27, but I made darn good money delivering. I had worked at a few other places, both local and chain, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion, even after this happened. Now I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could ever imagine. One night I was working and I had a double, 2 deliveries to take. Both were cash orders. I had $12 left in my bank, what drivers are given to use as change for cash orders, so you don't have a ton of cash on you at all times. The first order went on smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was at an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with a logo on it, all white sedans. This is important. I grab the order and go to the door to the apartment. A young guy came out, and a much bigger, older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously, and asked how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told him the amount, and he said that wasn't what he was told on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door. As the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again, and I broke down the order for him, trying to keep calm. Then the first guy held a gun to my right temple. Shortly after that, I felt a poke on my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried. Give me your money and keys, now. The first guy growled, and I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from my left. He had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me I hadn't seen yet. The big-haired kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I had left my wallet in my personal car. I saw him grab my cell phone, though. That's when the panic really began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my then 5-year-old son, who absolutely is my world. Hey, please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please. I lied. My son is very much alive. The kid behind me spoke softly. Trust me, just listen to him. You'll get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either. I could tell he had been crying by how his voice sounded. A car began pulling in, and the 3 boys took off to the other end of the complex in full sprint. Before the one behind me ran, he dropped the gun in front of me. Standard issue 9mm, silver and black. Safety off. Looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in and saw me, it was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me as the sky started to get dark. I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked if I was alright. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to talk to 911 as she set down her kid. Her boyfriend, I assume, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind, and these kids were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone and the cops had shown up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I will never forget this woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. The cops showed up and contacted my store, and my manager brought out the spare keys for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and I was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me how much they cared, but I told them I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the 72 was written off as a loss to the store. Thank God, because I had worked at the other stores that make you pay back the money out of pocket if you get robbed, to prevent drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was, to this day, one of the best bosses I've ever had. What I didn't know was I was in for a very, very long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked where he was. We usually meet up for drinks after work. He was around the corner at a bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in my city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me his dad had given him a heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the 2 shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him yet. He said yeah and handed me the phone. His dad asked if I could come to the station. I was honest though and I told him I'd had 2 shots, so he sent out a squad car to get me since it wasn't that far away. So we get to the station. They had suspects in custody already. I was needed to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They had been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery, speeding. The Be on the Lookout had already gone out and they matched the description. They had used the money to buy weed and gas and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them. The order had been placed on a stolen phone even. My phone was in the mix in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only and I did. They asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so that was easy. 9 of the 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would have completely reset. It unlocked. I told the police every detail yet again, although my parental instincts kicked in. I told them the guy behind me quite obviously was bullied into this and to show mercy. He was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me that he was the one talking. The other 3 denied involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out that later he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends. He was never charged. The boy who was behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16 and got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off so easy, despite having the gun to my back, was because I asked him to go easy on him, because he was a good kid who didn't want to be there. And he was the only one confessing. Makes sense, since he even said the other guy wouldn't have the phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops had they not been caught. But the other guy, the first kid who put the gun to my temple, it was his 18th birthday. He got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him for his behavior and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like grin. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will definitely commit more crimes. I have no doubt he will eventually end someone's life. You can see how cold he is just by looking in his eyes. He's an evil person. I grew up in a town full of murderers and abusers, and I had never seen this kind of evil in my life. And I never want to again. I asked to have my name stricken from the records and asked to remain anonymous in case he ever got out. I'm so glad I did because today I got a letter from the state. It's being released in February. The court only had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed the deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years, and it's only been 4. Apparently he's getting out early due to overcrowding. Not good behavior, overcrowding, this coming February. And I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, and everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we are all ready. But for his sake, let's not meet. At the time this happened, I was only a 13-year-old girl. This happened 2 years ago and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write. Classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip, and they would be back around 4 in the morning. Everything fell into place for me. Once my parents left around 8 o'clock, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the door. because my parents were paranoid after all, and it was their biggest thing that they engraved into me. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already thought I had enough reputation as a weirdo who was too much into true crime, and I didn't mention it. The night drew on, and I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often I would look over my shoulder, and the man would still be standing there. Around 10 o'clock, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting cold and was nearly pitch black with a few lit streetlights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet. The place we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in with a few exits and entrances. A large wide field with a small park in the back and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road, and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All the people left were getting picked up by cars. The man from earlier that I saw stood by the right part of the forest and road exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group and I tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably early 40s to late 30s, dark hair with a beard. Probably only around 5'9", but at the time it seemed like 6 foot or more. He stood about 10 feet from the exit I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I finally felt safe enough, I started to quickly walk through the woods. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying not to be suspicious, but it only made my fear worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park that we had hung out at, and I wasn't necessarily athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house now if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 20 yards away. So I ran, faster than I've ever. I could hear his footsteps behind me thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I rushed down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home longer. I could hear his heavy breath followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through the houses, backyards, and front yards, and I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs as I unlocked the door and bursted through it, shoving it closed behind me, and I heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all of the windows, turned off all the lights, and I hid in my bedroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he got in. But he didn't, luckily. If this was a better world, that would be where my story would end, but it doesn't. After a few months, I hadn't really told anyone what happened since I didn't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out. I didn't go out with anyone after this, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism, and I never went out past 7 o'clock. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home from the bus. She described him almost the exact same as the man who had chased me home. Even another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home once. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that this guy was just weird. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. But around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man. The guy who stalked me, actually. She told me that he'd been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me, I would most likely be in her position, or even dead. This incident happened during the summer of 2015, just after I had turned 21, and to date it is still one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. To this day, I still get creeped out when I remember it. The day after it happened, I went back to the park and I took pictures of the whole journey in the daylight to send to a friend, so I'll include them here as proof as well. One of my favorite things to do that summer was drive around late at night. As soon as the sun had dipped beneath the sky, or as soon as I clocked out from my job, I'd be in my car and ready to explore the city that I grew up in. July 9th, 2015 was one of those nights. My city's Italian-American festival was being held that week, so after getting out of an evening summer class I was taking at the time, I headed downtown to see the festival for a bit, and I met some friends. I left the festival around 10 p.m., and since I was still wide awake, I decided to go hang out in this little park that was on the shore of a local lake and listen to some music for a while. When I got there, no one was around, and the combination of the warm night air, the quiet rippling of the water from a gentle breeze, and the distant sounds and lights of the nearby city limits lighting up the edge of the horizon made for a perfect night to be out there alone. I parked near the gated entrance to the old weathered playground I had known since childhood and perched myself on one of the swings, with my headphones in and playlist blaring. I was there for about half an hour before they showed up. A set of headlights turned into the parking lot and caught my attention. I watched as a little red Saturn parked on my passenger's side, right next to the gate that I had come in. This little lakeside park is a common night fishing spot, so at first I didn't think anything of another car showing up, and I brushed it off. But after a few minutes, something in my brain told me to be aware of my surroundings. It was then that I realized for the last several minutes, the man and the woman who were the vehicle's occupants had been getting in and out of their car, talking in hushed whispers, and turning their stereo up and down as they did. At one point, they had opened their back passenger doors and were messing around in the back seat, like they were trying to unload something large. They made a concentrated effort to keep themselves in the darkness, and when I realized all of this, the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up. My brain told me to turn off my music, but keep my headphones in, and keep swinging a little bit, so they would think I was still oblivious to what they were doing. When I did, I heard the girl say something that made my blood freeze. "I think she's almost done on the swings." At that moment, I knew these people were up to something, and the realization that they had been watching me confirmed the warning bells going off in my head were not needless anxiety. I needed to get out of that park, but in order to do so, I would have to walk through the gate and past them to get to my car, and my mind was screaming at me not to go near them. Instead, I got off the swing and walked toward the back corner of the playground, where the majority of the large equipment was, and acted like I was texting someone. I hid myself from view while I tried to figure out what to do, and what I heard next made my heart drop into my stomach. A third person's voice joining their conversation. It was then that I realized that while I was busy keeping my eye on these weirdos, a second car had pulled into the parking lot, but the driver had never gotten out until now, when I was out of sight. It was an older-looking woman with a raspy voice, who sounded like she had been chain-smoking all of her life. And suddenly, the three of them started arguing in the darkness. I just knew I needed to get out of that park, but I didn't want to be seen. The part of the playground I was hiding in was situated up against a fence line that separated the playground and fishing area from the basketball courts and boat dock. Aiding and concealing me in the darkness was a large maple tree, whose thickly leaved branches dipped halfway to the ground, and whose trunk, thankfully, was growing on my side of the fence. I decided I was going to climb the tree, high enough to where I could at the very least saddle the fence and hop over. I did this as quickly and quietly as possible, and as I realized I was actually doing it, I was hit with a powerful combination of nerves and adrenaline that almost caused me to lose my balance and fall. Luckily, I saddled the chain link fence, which started squeaking loudly and digging painfully into my thighs through my jeans. But I didn't care. In one sweep, I was up and over the fence, free at last. Afterwards, I decided that I was going to slink around in the dark to the other gated entrance to the park by the boat dock, and then sneak my way along the road back to the entrance where I was parked. Once I was there, I was going to make a dash for my driver's side door and get in as quickly as possible, lock the doors, and get the hell out of that park. My heart was still pounding as I walked along the wet grass, but now that I was where I was at, doubts started to pop into my mind. What if I was over-exaggerating, and what if I was blowing things out of proportion, like I have a tendency to do sometimes? What if they weren't doing anything wrong? As I got closer to the main entrance, I did my best to hide myself in the shadows from the orange glow of the streetlight that illuminated the road. Just at the entrance was a large bush with a porta potty on the other side, and I quickly ducked behind it until I could work up the nerve to run to my car. The people were still there, but now they were congregating in the parking lot, with the raspy voice lady less than 50 feet away from me, standing next to her car. Just as I was trying to figure out what to do next, I heard her say the one thing on top of everything else that I heard and experienced that night that completely took all the strength and bravery out of me. "Did you get rid of the body yet?" It was like someone punched me in the stomach with an iron fist of fear, and all the momentum I had built up just drained from my body instantly. I wasn't sure if this lady was messing with me, and even after she said it, I wasn't even sure that I actually heard what I thought I heard her say. But whatever was going on, I knew I needed to get out of there, and fast. I barely had time to think as this lady got into her car and started the engine. With the sight of her taillights in reverse, prompting me to quick and immediate action. As she started to back up and swing around to pull out the gate, I dashed across the street and up a random person's driveway, concealing myself in thick foliage as quickly as possible. I watched as both cars pulled out of the parking lot. The gold Nissan that raspy lady had been driving going right, while the red Saturn with the guy and the girl went left off into the night. As soon as I was sure both cars were out of sight, I ran full speed down the driveway and into my car, shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. Once inside, I was relieved to find that they hadn't broken in and stolen anything, and I peeled out of the park, doing no less than 50 miles per hour on the main roads home. I had gotten to the park a little after 10 p.m., and it was now 11:45 p.m. I pulled into the driveway of my house with my car still running, and I spent at least 15 minutes on the phone with the police, crying as the full realization of what had just happened hit me. The county sheriff department was sent out to search the park when I said the lady had mentioned dumping a body, but nothing was found. They called me back around 3 in the morning once they finished their investigation and had me answer a few more questions. I didn't sleep at all that night. Around 7 a.m., I called my mom as she was getting ready to go into work, telling her what happened. Normally, my mother is quick to call me out on over-exaggerating things, and I called her partially to confirm that I was indeed overreacting to what had happened the night before. But after I was done telling my tale, she got really quiet on the other end of the phone before telling me not to ever go into that park at night again. I didn't go back there for months afterwards. To this day, I don't know if anything ever came of my report, or if those people were ever caught for anything. At the time, there was a man who had disappeared from the next town over, and his story was all over the local news. A few weeks after he went missing, his body was found in a major national park, about 30 minutes from where this little park was. I still wonder about all of that to this day. This happened roughly 6 years ago, and I would have been about 26 years old at the time. I live in a small town in the mountains of southern Appalachia. If you aren't from this region, and that immediately brings to mind visions of poverty and dark hollers, well, they do exist, but the town I am from and still reside in is a university town with roughly 70,000 people. We have a number of public parks, but in recent years the most popular is the newest, which was built on the south side of town and has a dog park, in addition to a normal playground type park for children, and numerous walking trails, some of which go through wooded areas. It isn't uncommon for people to be walking their dogs late at night. I need to describe the layout of the park a little bit in order for the story to make sense. There was a large parking lot on one end, and this is the main entrance of the park, and it is where the children's playground and the dog park are located, as well as the restrooms, etc. This lot is long, rather than wide, and stretches alongside a sidewalk that runs next to the playground. On the other end of the park, which is over some hills and through some lightly forested areas, there is a small pond and another smaller lot. This lot has a gate just like the bigger one, but it has a little area before the gate where it is common for people walking at night to park their cars. I had a friend back in those days who was an avid walker. She was a couple years older than I was, and although petite, was sort of fearless. She would very often go walking at night by herself, and her apartment at the time was sort of out in the country, but only a mile or so from this park. So sometimes she would drive out there and walk by herself at night as well. I would say things sometimes like, you should be more careful. Maybe that's just because I'm a man who was raised in the South and we're perpetually worried about the females in our lives. She was fairly enlightened and would get angry when I would say something like this. None of this is to say I told you so, by the way. I'm just trying to paint a picture. Anyways, long story short, I started meeting her some evenings and walking with her, figuring a bearded 6'1" and 250-pound man would be a deterrent to most creepers. So one night we were walking, and while there were usually a few people in the park, it wasn't super late. It was late fall, and the nights were starting to come a little bit quicker. It seemed like maybe it was around 8 p.m., but like I said, it's been 6 years. Anyways, I had a rental car that week, luckily as it turned out, because of some work being done on my car, and I had parked behind the gate on the wooded side of the park. As we came through the woods and rounded a hill towards the main entrance of the park, I sort of clocked a van in my peripheral vision that was pulling in the gate of the park, which for whatever reason had not yet been closed. The Parks and Rec employees in my town are sort of notorious for not being strict enforcers on the closed at dusk rule. The weird thing about this was that it was sort of a cliche creeper van. It was an older model Chevy with no windows in the back, a mottled rust and paint job, and dark tinted windows in the front. For a lot of you, depending on where you live, I'm sure this might already be raising alarms, but In Tennessee, that is like every fifth car on the road. As we walked up the sidewalk parallel to the lot, the van turned behind us and then drove slowly past us on our left, coming almost to a stop, then speeding up to circle around ahead of us at the end of the lot. At this point, obviously I was paying closer attention. Now the van was coming back toward us, and the driver's side window was down. This would be the part where a lot of naysayers will probably think I'm making this up, because the man staring at us from that van was about the closest thing to a cliche creep I could think of. He was large and even bigger than me, with weird aviator-style glasses that may have been sunglasses, but were transparent enough that you could still see his eyes. He was wearing a hat and a camo-style coat, and he had a black mustache. He idled not 10 feet from us, just staring at us expressionless for a moment. We both sort of stopped and stiffened and looked back at him. There was something about his gaze, some cold-hearted malevolence, the likes of which I hadn't really ever felt in my life, which immediately chilled me to my bones. I have read articles about sociopaths and psychopaths, where scientists theorize that the reason we feel uneasy in their presence is tied into an ancient biological response from the times when truly we were their prey, and they were predators among human groups and tribes. But I felt that in that moment. I felt like I was out in the wild, naked on the tundra, and he was zeroing in on me. It was this feeling more than anything that elevated this moment for me, from merely dealing with a creep to something that was perhaps far more sinister. I grabbed my friend by the arm and said roughly, "Let's go," and started quickly across the field toward the series of hills and trees that were between us and the car, leaving the sidewalk behind. She was shocked at first and followed quickly. We half walked and half ran a few hundred yards, before realizing that the van had pulled out of the lot behind us and disappeared. My adrenaline was still pumping, and we had a quick conversation, basically consisting of, "What in God's name was that?" and "Let's get back to the car and get out of here." We quickly moved through the woods and started back down the hill. As it descends toward the lot, there were a couple of wide, sweeping switchbacks with some trees and shrubs alongside. We crested the hill and could see the lot below, and what we saw there made my blood stop pumping for a moment. Behind my rental car, the Chevy van was parked, with his bright lights shining on the car and up the hill a little ways. We hid behind some foliage and watched as he switched his headlights on and off for a minute or two. Then he pulled back a bit and shined his brights further up the hill. He sat there for a long moment as we cursed the fact that we had left our cell phones in the car, tried to decide what to do. Of course, he abruptly peeled out of the lot and took off down the road, which I did not mention before is a 2-lane country road with not much on it but cow fields and trees. We took off running down the hill toward the car and were now just outside the ring of trees near the lot when he suddenly swings back in. Luckily, we were near cover and got behind a tree, just up the hill from him. Again, he started shining his brights off and on into the trees. At this point, I was thinking I was going to have to attack him or something to try and draw him away long enough for my friend to escape. Fear, adrenaline, and anger all converged in me like a dark river, and I was probably seconds away from bursting out from the tree and taking a run at him when he once again peeled out of the lot as fast as he could. Well, he didn't have to tell us twice. We sprinted the remaining distance to the rental car and jumped in. I took off and went about 60 miles per hour down the road until we got into a neighborhood. I never saw the van on the road. In fact, I didn't see any cars until we got to a main road. I have no idea where he went. If he was sitting somewhere off the road, waiting or what. We got back to her apartment and my friend told me that, at long last, she would accept a can of mace if I ever wanted to give her one. We had a good laugh at that, but we were desperately shaken. We decompressed and talked it over a while, and I agreed to contact the police the next day. I went down to the station and told an officer what happened, but I never heard anything else about it. I have no idea what he wanted. Maybe he was a pervert. Maybe he was a good old boy that just didn't like the idea of people in the park after dark. But that look he gave me when he was idling next to us makes me think we were pretty lucky to get away. Whatever his intentions, I would surely be glad to never meet him again.
I was driving back from a friend's house who lives an hour away. We lost track of time, so I didn't leave until around 2 a.m. I was really tired, and the drive was really boring. Most of the way home was a long straight road that didn't seem to have a single other car on it. For the first 20 minutes, it was just me staring at the endless pavement ahead and trying to not let my eyes shut. But then my headlights suddenly lit something up on the road, way ahead of me. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but as I got closer, I had to slow down and eventually stop. There was a semi-truck parked in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. I sat there for a few seconds, having no clue what I was seeing. At this point on the road, we were at least 30 minutes from town, and there was nothing out here. The only reason anyone would stop out here is if there was an emergency. I looked to the right of the truck, and there might have been enough room for me to get around the trailer, but there was a steep hill on the shoulder that would have been really risky to drive on the edge of. The other side of the truck had trees too close together for me to drive between. After being there for a whole minute, I figured this had to be an emergency and that my best and maybe only option was to check up on them. I got out of my car and began walking up to the front of the trailer. I remember how quiet it was outside, like the night was completely still and empty. As I got up to the front, though, I realized the light was on in the driver's cabin. I went up to the door and lightly knocked on it, then called out asking if they were okay. The window was way too high up to see through, so I couldn't really see anything from the ground. After a few seconds, there was still no response. I called out again, but there wasn't even the sound of any movement inside. My gut was telling me that something was seriously off about this. I looked down the road ahead, then back at the road I came from, seeing nothing but fog in the distance, which only reminded me how far away I was from anyone else. I grabbed the side of the door and lifted myself up onto the steps, then looked inside the window. There was stuff scattered everywhere, almost looking like they'd crashed or something, and making the whole cabin a total mess. But nobody was inside. Then I noticed the door on the other side was wide open. I stepped back onto the road and began walking around the truck to investigate the open door, but was stopped in my tracks when I saw a man in the forest walking up the side of the hill. He was tall, with shoulder-length hair, and had a very disheveled appearance.
Hey man, are you okay?
The man didn't look at me, but continued coming up from the forest and onto the road. In the faint light coming from my headlights, I saw dark red stains all around his clothes, and his face was covered in dirt and grime. Thinking he was clearly not okay, I offered to help, but he continued to not even acknowledge me. That was until I said I could call 911 for him. He immediately stopped walking and shot a look at me, holding eye contact for a few long seconds. "I'm fine," he said in a deep, threatening tone. I stopped talking and watched him get into the truck. Then I rushed back to my car as the truck started driving away. I turned around and drove right back to my friend's house, where I called 911 and gave every detail I could remember. Unsurprisingly, the case never went further than that. What happened on that road is still a mystery, one that still terrifies me. The way the truck was stopped, being sideways and with the cabin looking as chaotic as it did, I think something or someone forced them to stop. What happened afterwards is debatable, but the man I saw probably wasn't the original truck driver, and I think we can all assume what likely happened in the forest below the road. I worked at Papa John's for a couple years at the end of high school and beginning of college. I delivered pizzas and sometimes helped with cleaning and stuff because I worked nights. This was my normal 4 to 11 shift, on a slow weekday. By 10, we weren't getting any orders, so we started cleaning and preparing for closing so we could leave right at 11. But at 10:45, the store phone started ringing. I let my manager pick it up, and from hearing what he was saying, I knew someone was placing an order. Despite my shift ending in 15 minutes, I still had to deliver the order, so I was visibly annoyed. I waited for the pizza to be ready, then left just before 11. The address wasn't too far, I think just under 10 minutes away, but when I got there, I was a little bit confused. There was a long driveway going into the trees, but I couldn't see any houses or lights at the end. I looked back at the map, zooming in and seeing that there was a house. It was just really far down. I turned onto the driveway and put my brights on. After the first part that connected to the main road, it became a gravel path and was honestly hard to follow because it was thin and the trees were really close to the sides. Eventually it opened up a bit, and across a small field was an old wooden house. It was too big to be a cabin, but it definitely was giving off that middle-of-the-woods cabin-type feeling. There wasn't exactly a place to park, so I just stopped in the gravel and got out. A few of the outdoor lights were on, but they were not bright at all, and most of the woods surrounding the area were completely dark. I started walking up to the door, hoping to do this quickly because something was starting to make me feel off about this place. I got up to the porch, and just before I knocked, I heard something behind me. It was leaves crunching in the woods near the gravel driveway that I'd just come from. I looked out there for a second, but it was too dark to see anything, so I turned back and knocked on the door. While I waited, I looked back at my car, wishing I'd left the keys inside so the headlights would stay on. Even from the porch, it was hard to see any more than just a small glare coming from the plastic reflectors. The rest of the car was not visible, falling past the dim light coming from the house. I heard footsteps inside, then the door opened. It was an old man with short black hair and glazed over eyes.
I have a Papa John's pizza order for you,
I said, holding out the box. There was a slight pause before the man slowly reached out and took it, looking me in the eyes the whole time. He set it down on a table next to him and got his wallet out, slowly counting through some cash, when I heard it again. Leaves crunching behind me. I looked over my shoulder toward my car where I heard it coming from, but just when I thought I might have seen something, the man grabbed my shoulder.
"Here, for you,"
he said, holding out some cash. I took it, then quickly looked back at my car, but didn't see anything. And a few seconds later, I was shaken by the man slamming the door behind me. Before leaving the porch, I got my phone out and turned the flashlight on, then hurried back to my car, shining the light in all directions, but not seeing anything. I got in and made a small U-turn, then drove out of there. My unsettling feelings stayed with me the whole drive back, and after clocking out, I did a quick walk around of my car. For the most part, everything looked okay, but once I got a closer look, I noticed some scratches near the passenger door handle that I didn't remember being there before. I couldn't verify anything though, and even if I could, I don't think there's really anything I could do. But I think someone was out there in the woods, trying to get into my car without me knowing. Maybe it was all just a setup. I can't really say for sure, but if they had gotten in, there's a chance they would have hid in the back seat and waited for me. What would happen after that is best left unknown. In 2018, I went through a divorce that left me basically without anything. I managed to move into a small home, but had nothing to fill it with. I needed furniture, appliances, literally everything. Obviously, this is a big task to take on, especially financially, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to get some discounted stuff on Craigslist. My priority was on the big things, like a couch, TV, and so on, and it really didn't take long to find some deals. I messaged a few people and picked up a few things, and during this process, I found and contacted a seller about buying their TV stand. It was posted for $40 and looked like a super average wooden TV stand. The seller, Matt, was very strict on when I could pick it up though. It had to be after 9 because of his work schedule, and it couldn't be on the weekend. This time frame still worked for me, but I just found it kind of odd how specific he was, and I figured that was probably why no one had bought it yet. I agreed to pick it up on a Wednesday at 9:30, and on that day I followed through. He sent me his address, and I headed out 30 minutes to his place. The town he lived in I'd only heard in conversation before, and had never actually been to it, and I soon found out why. Most of the homes were run down and very old. Even the roads were in bad shape, with a lot of the streetlights not even working. Pulling up to Matt's house didn't make me feel any better. It was just as run down looking as the others, with only what looked like a hallway light on inside. And walked onto their porch, ringing the doorbell. As I waited, I looked around at his lawn. He had stuff everywhere, like garden statues and just interesting decorations all throughout his yard, and even on the porch. Then he opened the door. Matt was a tall and skinnier looking man, probably in his 40s. He had a tired look, as if he hadn't slept in days, and I could smell booze from his breath as he welcomed me inside. If I'd known beforehand that this was who I'd be buying from, I never even would have come here, but it was too late for that now. As we walked down the hall, there was stuff scattered all around the house. Not to the point like a hoarder's home you'd see on TV, but more like an abandoned house that had been trashed by random teenagers. When we got to the living room in the back of the house, he pointed at the TV stand. The room was barely lit, making it hard to see what condition it was in.
Any chance you could turn on the light for me?
I asked politely. Matt didn't respond, but walked over to the wall and flicked on a small lamp in the corner. It was around this time that I got a really weird feeling that something was wrong, and before I even got to look at the TV stand, I heard someone else behind me. Another man had come around the corner, standing next to Matt. He didn't say hello or anything. He just watched me. I was really unsure what to make of this, and didn't want to overreact right away, but was also getting really uncomfortable as that eerie feeling only grew larger. I was standing there trying to think of what to say or do, but then Matt walked past me and stood in front of the TV stand. They were now on either side of me, facing me and not speaking. Several long seconds passed as nobody spoke or moved, before I quickly walked past the other guy and down the hallway toward the front door. As I left, I heard them laughing in the room behind me like this was funny, and as I got halfway to my car, the front door slammed shut. Maybe it was just some sick joke they were pulling, trying to get me to freak out. Or maybe it was something more sinister. I don't plan on finding out, though. I was 23 and looking for a studio apartment to rent. I was fresh out of college and had almost no money to work with, only making a bit more than minimum wage, so I really needed the absolute cheapest place I could find. At first, I was looking for one bedroom and studios, but over the following weeks, it became apparent that that was just not in the budget. Reluctantly, I went on to Craigslist and looked at their section for housing. I knew this site had some bad reputation, but one of my friends had a good experience and vouched for it, so I gave it a go. The first day of looking on Craigslist, I didn't find anything, though I got a bit of hope seeing there were a lot of listings. They just weren't in my area or price range. I think it was on the third or fourth day that I reloaded the website and found a new listing that piqued my interest. It was for a place a few miles away. I clicked on it and looked at all the details, seeing it was a studio in a small apartment building. The pictures were really low quality, like so pixelated that I couldn't see anything. But with everything else seeming good, I sent the owner a message. He replied quickly, and we scheduled a tour later that day around 7. From our quick back and forth, I saw nothing unusual about this guy. His messages were very professional, and he seemed happy to show me the place. A couple hours later, I got in my car and started driving over to the address he sent me. I should mention that I knew beforehand that this wasn't a very nice area of our city, but it's the cheapest area, and honestly I didn't think it was that bad. Though in hindsight, maybe I was just being naive because it was my only option. Anyway, I pulled up to this rather old-looking apartment building. I parked on the side of the street and got out, texting the man that I'd arrived and walking up to the front door. I didn't see the man anywhere, so I buzzed the room and waited for a few seconds, then the door unlocked. I stepped in, greeted by a staircase in the middle and 2 rooms on either side. Before I even got to looking at the room numbers, a voice yelled from somewhere above the staircase, saying they were on the 3rd floor. Assuming the man was talking to me, I started walking up. At this point though, I was beginning to wonder why he didn't meet me at the door, especially since he was so professional when texting. As I reached the top of the steps, there was a small hallway with 2 doors, one of which was open. I walked over and looked inside, seeing a man standing a few feet away and looking over at me. He greeted me and shook my hand, then showed me inside, but immediately I was confused. The place had a couch, TV, chairs, and even food on the counters. It was clearly lived in.
Does someone else live here?
I asked kindly. The man quickly replied with a short laugh and said no one lived here and everything would be gone by tomorrow. I smiled and said okay, but that response didn't come off the right way to me. He started leading me further in, pointing out features of the place, but it suddenly came across me that this wasn't even a studio. There were multiple doors which had to lead to other rooms. This was at least a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, and there was no way the price could be what he said it was. It seemed like he noticed my suspicions as he stopped what he was saying and moved toward the hallway. He opened one of the doors that was clearly to a bedroom and started telling me to take a look inside. But before I could answer, we were interrupted when my phone chimed. I pulled it out of my pocket and checked who it was. My face went pale, seeing it was from the man from Craigslist, asking where I was. I looked up in horror, realizing what had happened, and I could tell that whoever this guy was in front of me knew that I'd figured it out. This terrifying moment passed, and the guy didn't move or say anything. He just stood and looked at me with a blank stare. After a moment, I hurried out of there and down the stairs, not hearing the guy follow. I got in my car and left. Being so horrified, I never even texted the actual man back, as I was no longer interested in staying anywhere near that place, and I didn't know if maybe he was in on it too somehow. But whoever that guy was that lured me into his home was so close to being able to probably abduct me. I don't know, and I don't even want to know, but I never opened Craigslist again after that night. I was on Craigslist for the first time in probably 5 years. I'd forgotten about the site, never having any need or use for it, and never really hearing about it anymore. But due to my moving situation, I needed to get rid of a bunch of random things. I initially called a junk removal company, hoping they would just take everything, but their estimate was over $400 for getting rid of just a couple things. So that's when I went to Craigslist. I put up a listing for free stuff and had pictures of all the things I was giving away. Maybe I just didn't know how it worked nowadays, but I thought I'd get a lot of responses from people wanting to pick up free stuff. However, I barely got any, and the ones that did respond to the listing ended up ghosting me after a couple texts. Then, about a week after making the listing, a man who introduced himself as KJ reached out. He said he wanted to pick up my couch and was good to do so on any day. I really thought this was just going to be the same as all the other people that reached out, so I didn't put much effort into getting this man to actually come pick up the couch. I let him know that I worked between 9 and 5, so if he wanted to pick it up, he could just let me know. Again, I didn't think he'd actually come. But sure enough, in the morning before work, he sent me a text saying he'd like to swing by tonight. I told him that was great, and as I left work that night, I sent him my address. The drive home was only 20-ish minutes, but I'd hope he comes sooner rather than later because I didn't want to waste my night waiting on them, even more so if they didn't end up showing. When I pulled into my driveway though, a car was parked on the curb right next to my house. Nobody was in it, and it was the only car parked on the whole street, so it seemed clear that they were at my house. Thinking it was KJ, I quickly got out and ran up to my front door, but he wasn't there. It was in the back of my mind that this could be just some crazy coincidence, and the car was for someone else's house, but I wasn't convinced. I got inside and sent a text to KJ, asking what his ETA was. Then I stood by the window and looked outside. After 10 or so minutes, I still hadn't gotten a response. I didn't see anyone outside either, so I calmed myself down and turned away from the window. I went to the kitchen, pouring myself a drink and just standing there, when a small thud sounded from upstairs. Unaware of what it was, I put my drink down and listened. There were a few seconds of silence. Then suddenly, heavy footsteps were running down the stairs. I was so caught off guard, I just stood where I was and stared down the hallway as a man appeared at the other end, running right to the front door. He swung it open and ran out, and when I made it to the front, he was already driving away in that car that was parked on the curb. I was still stunned, trying to process what happened because it was all so sudden and quick. Eventually, I got my phone out and called the police, then tried calling KJ, but he didn't pick up, which meant to me that it was definitely him who had broken in. When the police investigated, they found that KJ's phone wasn't registered to a name or address, so we were back to square one. Nothing ever did come of it, despite me trying multiple times to get the police back on the case. As far as I know, nothing was stolen, so maybe he didn't have enough time, or he was waiting for me. Maybe that thud I heard was him accidentally giving himself away, so he took his chance to run now that he didn't have the surprise on me. But whatever really happened, all I can do is hope that he never comes back. I live in a small 4-story apartment complex. I used to have a roommate, but they moved out a few months before this, and I decided it would be easier for me to just stay at the apartment rather than finding a new place. The other people living in the building were mostly older couples, but I'd never really met any of them. We all kept to ourselves, which I actually liked. Anyway, I was getting home from work late one night, entering the complex around 11 p.m. It was quiet as I walked up the stairs to my room, but when I rounded the corner into the hallway, a man was standing at my door. He immediately noticed me, and before I'd even had the chance to react, he started apologizing and saying he'd mixed up the doors. He then turned around and went into the apartment right across from mine. I'd never met him before, or even seen him, but seeing that he lived in the unit across from me, I figured maybe he did actually mix up the doors, especially if he'd just moved in. It was still really weird though. I didn't know why he would just be standing outside of the door if he did think it was his, or why when he saw me, he suddenly knew that he was at the wrong door. Whatever the case, I went inside and locked the door behind me, not sure what to make of the scenario. It was so late, and I was really tired, so maybe I should have been more worried than I was, but I just didn't have the energy to think about it. I made a quick meal, then sat on the couch for a bit and watched some TV. About 30 or so minutes went by, until I heard something outside my door. It was just a quiet shuffling sound, but it sounded almost like it was up against the door. I got up and went over, listening for a second before opening it. No one was there. I then stepped into the hallway and looked down, not seeing anyone, but heard footsteps going down the stairs. I went back in and closed the door. Maybe I was overthinking it now, but I started thinking that the man could have leaned against my door to listen into my apartment. It would explain the shuffling sound I heard, and how they knew to leave as soon as I started walking up. Again, I could have just been imagining the worst case scenario, but I was definitely more shaken for the rest of the night. I didn't get in bed until 1 a.m., but I fell asleep soon after. Nothing else that I know of happened that night, or in the morning. I went to work, and again got back to the apartment around 11. Walking in, I was a bit more cautious than the night before. I walked up the stairs and looked down the hallway, but no one was at the door. Still, for some reason, I got a strange feeling seeing the hallway empty, and I didn't know why. I quickly went inside and locked the door behind me, only to turn around and be face to face with the man from last night. He was standing in the doorway to my bedroom and immediately started telling me to be quiet and do as he says, trying to direct me into the living room. I took my chances, turning back around and trying to get the door open, but the man grabbed my arm and started to pull me back just when I got it open. I yelled as loud as I could as he tried covering my mouth, but being unsuccessful, he let me go. As I ran down the stairs, I heard him leaving as well. I went straight to my car, driving away and calling the police. When they got there, the man was gone. Of course, I told them that he lived in the room across from mine, but it turned out to be a vacant unit. The man, whoever he was, didn't even live in the building. I don't know how he got into the building, or into both mine and the vacant room, but clearly he had access that he shouldn't have. What he wanted to do by breaking into my apartment and waiting for me is something I hope to never find out firsthand. With him still being out there, though, all I can do is pray he wasn't targeting me in particular. This happened a few months ago. I'm 32 and live in a small house alone. It was one of my days off of work, so I was at home trying to relax and enjoy the day. It was about 4 p.m. and I had just started cooking dinner when a knock came from the front door. I put everything down and went up to the front. There was a man standing on my porch, and behind him was a small gray van parked on the curb. I opened the door.
How can I help you?
The man had a delayed reaction, but then said he was doing free home inspections in the neighborhood and wanted to offer me a free inspection for my house. The whole time he was speaking, though, it wasn't even like a typical salesperson. He said it all in a monotone voice and with just a blank expression. Even if he was normal, though, it seemed kind of sketchy, so I said I was okay and closed the door. I went back to the kitchen and continued cooking, but after a few minutes I started getting a really weird feeling about that man that came to my door and what he was up to. I walked back up to the front to make sure he'd driven away, but when I looked out the peephole, the man was still on my porch. He looked spaced out, staring at the door and not moving. By now, I was sure there was something wrong with him. Maybe he was drunk or high, or just not all mentally there. But what he was actually doing at my house, I still didn't know. Not wanting to take any risks, I went back to the kitchen and called the police to report the strange man staying outside my house. They said an officer would arrive in a few minutes, so I went back and kept watching the man. About a minute later, though, he walked off my porch and into his van, then drove away just before the officer made it. The timing of that was unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I was just happy he was gone. I gave a description to the officer just in case, then went back to trying to enjoy the rest of my night. At least a couple hours passed with no more conflict. It was 8 or 9 p.m. and I was resting in my bed on my phone, but through the open window, I heard the rattling sound of an old vehicle pulling up and parking outside my house. Once I heard someone getting out, I quickly went up to the window. It was that same old van, but I didn't see the man anywhere. He must have rushed away as soon as he got out. Again, I quickly got my phone and called 911, but after reporting it, and just as I hung up, there was a loud thump downstairs. It felt like I could almost feel the walls shake a little, so I knew the man was likely trying to break in. I opened my bedroom door and went out into the hallway, then looked down the staircase and tried to listen. It was now eerily quiet. I walked down a few steps and looked around. All of the lights were off, but I saw the curtains by one of the windows slightly swaying in the wind. I looked closer, seeing the window had been forced open. My whole body tensed up as I tried to control myself, knowing the man was likely somewhere in my house right now. I carefully and quietly went back up the steps, then hid in the bedroom closet. I didn't hear anything until a few minutes later when 2 officers knocked on the front door. I ran down and let them in, but still, we didn't hear anyone trying to run away or anything. It only took a few seconds for the officers to find the man hiding behind the kitchen counter. He gave up without a fight. Disturbingly though, he was holding a large hammer, which he'd used to force open the window. Apparently when they tested him at the station, he wasn't high or drunk, but he still had that eerily vacant personality. He never said his intentions, almost like he didn't even remember that anything had happened. It's hard for me not to think about the other ways this could have gone, though. If I'd gone to sleep and not heard him get in, I might have come to a horrible fate in the morning, or possibly not even been given the luxury of waking up. I was out camping in the backcountry near where I lived. I'm not much of a hiker, so I never take trails more than a mile or two. This one was just over a mile from the campsite to the trailhead where my car was parked. I'd been spending the weekend there, camping out by the lake, and was planning on staying for another 2 nights. On the 3rd day, I spent the morning hiking back to my truck and grabbing my fishing rod and some spare food, then hiking back to the camp. I thought I'd try my luck at fishing while I had the time. When I got back to the camp, though, there was another tent set up. It was farther down on the edge of the lake, and I didn't see anyone by it. Initially, I didn't care, but then it came through my mind that I hadn't seen anyone on the only trail leading to this part of the lake. Then again, there could be some other path that I just didn't know about. Whatever the case, I set up my rod and got to fishing. Every 20-ish minutes, I'd glance over at the tent on the side of the lake, but at no point during the 3 hours I was out there did I see anyone. Once the sun was starting to get lower, I packed up my rod and went back to my tent. I ate and got some sticks for the campfire, then waited for it to get a little darker before lighting it up. As soon as I did, I saw someone's shadow move in the forest ahead of me. They were just far enough for the light to not reach them, so after that quick glimpse, all I could see was total darkness. I made the assumption that it was the person with the tent down by the lake, probably gathering sticks for a fire. It was weird that just when I lit up my campfire, they were right outside my camp, but I chose to not overthink it. I leaned back in my chair and relaxed, looking at the fire, the sky, and the lake. It was so calming, I almost wanted to fall asleep in the chair. But just a half hour later, I looked past the fire and saw several figures coming from the forest. Once they were closer, I counted 4 men, all coming right up to my campsite. There was a lot going through my head, but I tried to suppress any nervous feelings and hoped it was just a nearby camping group in need of help or something. When they came into the light, I could see that they were all in their 30s or 40s and had straight faces. Once they were just a few feet from me and were still walking, I got up from my chair and nervously began asking what they needed. None of them responded, only continuing to walk up. 2 of them went behind me, going straight for my tent, as the other 2 pushed me aside. There was no doubt what was going on now, but I knew fighting back would only make things worse. I watched the 2 men start searching through my things, as the other 2 continued to push me further away. I tried saying anything I could, but the men had an emptiness to their eyes, that showed they did not care at all. I was telling myself in my head to just stay calm and let them take what they want. But the two men kept pushing and dragging me further and further out, away from the campsite and away from the light. After a minute, I could barely see where we were going and couldn't hear anything but our footsteps in the silent forest. Then we stopped. I turned and faced them, and as we stood in the darkness between the trees, all my fears just hit me at once. One of them reached for something, and I instantly took off running. All I could hear were my footsteps pounding against the leaves and grass as I got further out. I still had a general sense of direction, so I tried to get back to the trail. When I did, I went straight for my truck, and from what I could tell, nobody followed me. I reported the case to the police, but in the end, almost all of my stuff was stolen, and no trace was left to help figure out who they were. What they were dragging me out into the forest to do is probably obvious, so I think I was beyond lucky to have made it out with my life. My brother Jason and I moved out to Colorado several years back. We both wanted to live by the mountains, but neither of us could afford to on our own, so we split the rent on a townhome in the suburbs right outside of Denver. This worked out perfectly because we were only 10 to 15 minutes away from a huge line of mountains. One thing I will mention about these nearby hiking and camping trails, though, is that they're pretty packed. It's so accessible to everyone around, and to tourists, that almost any time of the year, it's hard to find solitude. Because of this, me and my brother decided to plan a 3-day backpacking trip that would take us away from the crowd of people and hopefully give us some peace and quiet. I trusted him to route our trip, and a couple weeks later, we drove down to the trailhead. Only one other car was parked there when we arrived. It was some old-looking SUV covered in dust, looking like it'd been through a rough drive. Seeing as it was likely only one other person was hiking this route, we went in with a positive attitude. The first day of backpacking was an 8-mile hike. Most of the terrain was actually flat until we got to the last couple miles, where we started up a mountainside. It was pretty tiring, but Jason promised that the campsite would be worth it, and it turned out he wasn't lying at all. About 3/4 up the mountain, there was a small flat area right on the side of the cliff with a view of the whole valley. It was stunning, especially with the sun starting to set. After taking in the view, we started pitching our tents, then gathered up some sticks and stones to make a fire pit with. Once the fire was going, we sat down and just talked. I don't even have any idea how long we were talking for, at least 2 hours or something, when we both heard something from the trail. We instantly went silent, listening as footsteps started making their way up the trail and toward our campsite. A minute later, a man came out of the dark and into the far light coming from our fire. He wasn't wearing a headlamp, which every hiker and camper knows is an absolute must when there's even the possibility of being out in the dark. As he walked up, I think both Jason and I knew something was wrong. He had a grin on his face just as he approached the campfire.
Hey, did you need something?
Jason asked, standing up. The man looked at Jason, then at me, keeping his grin as he started to explain himself. He said he was a park ranger and had been following our trail for a while. He said this section had been closed off for the season and we couldn't be here. Something was really off though, because we knew this park was open, and we had even gotten permits from the state the day prior to camping out there. We also knew that park rangers would not be out here in the middle of a mountain trail at night. But if he wasn't who he said he was, then what was he doing out here? I could tell Jason's mind was racing too, as we both looked at the man and started asking questions, but he cut us off quickly.
You both need to leave with me right now. Pack up and follow me. I'll lead you guys back to the trailhead.
We stood there in silence for a moment, taking in what he just said and realizing that there was something seriously wrong here. The man still stayed by the fire with that same grin on his face.
No, we're staying here,
Jason said. The man looked at him again, then at me, keeping that same eerie grin as he just turned around and walked away. Terrified, we didn't even speak for a few minutes, just listening to make sure he didn't come back. Then we grabbed some more dry sticks and rekindled the fire. Neither of us were sleeping. We stayed up the entire night, sometimes hearing what we thought were footsteps again, but never seeing the man. Once the sun was up, we packed and left, cutting our trip short and retracing the trail back to our car. When we got back, that same dusty SUV was there, which got us both wondering if that hiker had run into the same man as us, and what happened to them. We notified the police, but ultimately found nothing out of it. There was no doubt the man was lying about being a park ranger, but the fact that he tried to lead us out into the woods in the middle of the night means he was likely trying something horrible. What that was, we don't know, but it seems like the other hiker may have been unfortunate enough to find out. I used to go camping all the time with some of my buddies from college, but once we graduated, we could never find time anymore. Everyone's schedules were different, so I ended up going out on my own. There was a camping ground that we used to go to a lot, so I played it safe and went to that same place. It was somewhat far out and not the easiest to get to, but that's why I liked it. Nobody would ever be there because there were a lot of easier options nearby to camp at. Knowing the route, I got there no problem and set all of my stuff up. Not long after though, a man showed up. He looked like any other hiker, but he only had a small backpack, so definitely no tent or camping gear. The only thing that had me questioning why he was here was that this wasn't a very scenic spot or anything. It was a nice place to camp because it was an open area with trees around, but if you're not camping, then there would be no reason to hike all the way out here. I didn't think all that much about it at the time because the man seemed normal enough. Maybe he just wanted a quiet space to relax for a bit. I stayed by my tent and the man stayed on the other side of the campgrounds. Around 6, I walked away from my tent to cook my food, and it was around this time that I saw the man finally leave. I thought it was a little late to be walking back because it was going to be completely dark in less than an hour, and the hike was probably 3 hours. Other than that, I was just happy to be alone now. I boiled some water with my mini stove and made one of my freeze-dried meals, then went back near my tent and sat down. The sun was just about gone, so I brought out a small lantern and hung it on the side of the tent as I stayed outside and took in the atmosphere. It suddenly hit me that I was alone out there, and that usually this is when we'd all gather around and talk by a campfire, but by myself, I didn't really have anything to do. After a while, I turned off the lantern and went inside my tent, laying down and turning in for the night. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps nearby. When I opened my eyes, it was pitch black, and I had no idea how long I'd been asleep for, but the footsteps came closer and closer until they stopped on the other end of the campground. After a few seconds, I felt around for my lantern and turned it on, then unzipped the tent and looked out. 20 or so feet from my tent, there was the shape of a man standing right by where I'd seen the guy from earlier standing, and from what I can make out, it was likely the same person. But they were just standing there, not doing anything. It was far enough into the night that this was immediately disturbing, no matter the context, and having turned my lantern on, he definitely saw me.
Hey, are you okay?
I called out to him. I waited a couple seconds, but he didn't show any signs of acknowledging me. I couldn't even tell which direction he was facing, but he was either facing away from me or directly at me, and I don't even know which way was more disturbing. I reached for my pocket knife from my backpack, then did the only thing I could do, which was stay sitting there and wait. The most increasingly uneasy 15 minutes of my life passed as I looked at this man standing there and barely move, before he suddenly turned and walked off in the same direction he had gone before. And I could see from the way his figure moved when he turned that he had been facing me. So that whole time he was there, he was just staring at me. I felt chills run through me as the man's footsteps got quieter and quieter, fading out in the distance. I didn't know what else to do other than stay up in case he came back, and as far as I know, he never did. I left in the morning and got back safely, but since then, I haven't been out camping. I don't know what that man was doing, but there's no world in which that wasn't extremely disturbing. Maybe I scared him off by waking up and watching him to make sure he didn't do anything, but that just terrifies me to think about if I hadn't woken up that night. This happened only a few months ago. I work at a small retail store in my hometown as an overnight employee. I do all the regular things like stocking shelves and taking inventory, and sometimes unloading late arrival trucks. The job is very chill, being that I'd usually work alone or with one other person, so nobody is there to boss me around all day. On this night, I was alone until 4 a.m., and I had a lot to do. Over the course of an hour, I was in the aisles the whole time, not needing to go to the back room for anything. But at around 11:30, I thought I heard something from the back. I walked down to the end of the aisle and looked around, then went into the warehouse room, and right as I entered, there was a knock on the back door. That door was only used for truck drivers when delivering a load, but I was never notified about any deliveries this night. Being a large metal door though, there was no peephole or glass to look out of and see who it was. I walked over to the delivery bay and opened the garage just a crack, and just as I'd assumed, there was no truck. I was almost hoping there would be though, because now I was really skeptical as to who was knocking on the back door in the middle of the night. A few minutes went by, and no more knocks or sounds came from the door. I even pressed my ear against it and tried to listen, but I was pretty sure whoever had been out there was gone now. Being curious and slightly dumb, I opened the door to make sure nobody was still outside. I peered out into the unlit driveway running behind the building. There were no cars, no people, and not even any sounds. It was just empty and quiet. Seeing this and thinking back to the loud knocking, I felt a shiver go through me and I closed the door. I walked back to the aisle I was in before and tried to get back to work without worrying too much. Through the next couple hours, I went in and out of the back room several times, but never heard anything else. It was 2 a.m. by this point, and I was finishing up stocking one of the middle aisles when a very quiet but recognizable sound came from the back. It was the metal door clicking shut. My face went white as I froze up. I didn't hear anything else, but I knew I had to check on it. I walked very quietly, still listening as I approached the back doors. At first glance, looking around the warehouse, I didn't see anything, so I made my way further in and toward the back door. It was closed, and being that it only opens from the inside, I was just confused. Trying to think of what could have happened, I turned and looked down the hall of lined up boxes when I saw a figure facing me. He stood at the end of the hallway, seeming to have just rounded the corner and not expecting to see me. But after a short moment of shock, the man started sprinting at me. He was large and intimidating, with a look of anger in his eyes as he came barreling down the hallway. I ran for the door and into the grocery aisles, trying to make it to the front of the store. The man's footsteps coming up behind me were horrifying, but by the time I got to the front, the footsteps had stopped. I pulled my keys out and unlocked the door, and as I shoved the door open, I looked to my side and saw the man standing at the end of the aisle, just watching me. Without hesitation, I ran out into the parking lot and into my car, calling 911. By the time the cops arrived, the man was long gone, with no traces of where he went. Through the security footage, we could see the man wedging something into the back door that somehow unlocked it, allowing him to get inside. Once he was in, he looked around as if trying to find something particular before he saw me and chased me to the front. Why he let me leave and why he even broke in is still unknown. I don't know what would have happened had the man caught up to me or decided to not let me leave, but I'm just thankful it never had to come to that. I'm a 26-year-old female, and it was October of last year when this happened. The weather was getting colder, and we had a few days in a row of constant raining. I didn't mind, as I spent most of my time working from home. This day I had gotten up early and started work, but around 1 p.m., I was interrupted from my Zoom meeting by the power shutting off. I knew right away it was the power to the whole house and not just my computer, because all the lights went out too. I quickly got my phone and held it up as a light source, then went over to the window to see if the neighbors were blacked out too. It was really dark outside because of the clouds and heavy rain, but all the houses nearby still had their lights on. Now I was a little worried that something was actually wrong with my house. I left the room and went downstairs, getting a better flashlight, and then heading down into the unfinished basement. I maneuvered around in the dark through my stacked up storage boxes until I got to the electrical panel. The main power switch was in the off position. I'm not too experienced with these sort of things, but I did know that usually the switches would just be loose and not fully pushed the other way. I flicked it back to the on position and everything immediately lit up and seemed to be working. I shut the electrical panel and went back upstairs to my office, then waited for the internet and everything to get running before I rejoined the Zoom call and got back to work. I was at my desk for the rest of the afternoon, working late to prepare a presentation for tomorrow. I didn't finally close my computer until 8 p.m. The storm was just as bad as before, but it was way darker outside, which made every flash of lightning beam through the windows. I got up from my desk and opened my office door, but as I left the room, I heard a few bumps from downstairs. I didn't think it was anything more than something blowing into the side of the house, but as I got to the bottom of the stairs, the power shut off again. It caught me by surprise, even scaring me a bit. I stood there for a moment and listened for something that might have caused it, but it was silent aside from the rain and thunder. Even the bumps that I'd been hearing just seconds ago had stopped. I went over and got the flashlight again and made my way over to the basement door. I opened it and walked down to the bottom of the steps. The sound of the storm was way louder than I was expecting, echoing through the room in a way that it wasn't before. I shined the flashlight around and started walking through the boxes toward the electrical panel, but on the floor below it was a puddle of water. I was shocked, but I don't think it really set in yet as to what that meant. I got closer and pointed the light around the floor, seeing more wet areas on the concrete, before my light fell on a few stacked up boxes. Above it, the window well was open and water was flowing down the wall into the basement. Now my heart was racing, and when I approached it, there were muddy shoe prints on top of the boxes, like it had been used as a stool to climb in and out of the window well. I frantically spun around, flashing my light all throughout the basement, terrified that someone was hiding behind the boxes and watching me. Then, in an instant, I sprinted to the stairs and ran up to the first floor. I grabbed my keys and locked myself in my car, then called the police. They arrived 10 minutes later, clearing out the house and not finding anyone. They did confirm, though, that someone had broken in, finding undone screws to the window well. They set it back into place to prevent any more flooding, but after I gave my statement, they basically just said to update them if I had any new information. There was nothing else. I'm left with no idea who broke in or what they were trying to do. Even more unsettling is the fact that when they shut off the power earlier in the day, they were probably in my basement, only a few feet from me, hiding in the dark, while I had no idea. That could also mean that they were in my house for hours, and yet, I still can't find any reasons for it.